he was yelling and screaming, I just fell down a cliff. The cliff was probably not much more than that. That was the extent of the cliff, and he was in fine health. Okay, moving right along. I mentioned APA accreditation. So in the late 70s, we made the decision that we really should apply for APA accreditation. We were the first professional school independent of a university, and we decided we wanted to blaze new territory and get APA accreditation. APA was not terribly thrilled with us, and there are people at APA who have never been thrilled with us and made life somewhat difficult. So in the late 70s, we decided to apply. We hire a consultant whose name was George Stryker, a very well-known psychologist from Adelphi. And he made some recommendations as to what we needed to change in order to be, to ultimately get accreditation from APA. And a couple of the recommendations flew in the face of what our founding philosophy was. So, for example, there had to be faculty rank. So we had to come up with a way to evaluate the faculty. So some were assistant, associate, full professor, et cetera, et cetera. So we put that in place. He also said we have to do something to have tenure. And we really were quite resistant to that recommendation. And so came up with a policy that approached tenure but didn't quite get there. So right now, for an initial contract, faculty member, I think it's 1 year. It's a 1-year contract, and we see how things are going. Then may get a 3-year fixed contract, and after the 3-year fixed, and they look at the student evaluation. So what you write about the faculty is taken very seriously. If the faculty member does well with a 3-year fixed contract, they then get a 3-year rolling contract. And what that means, for every year, as you end 1 year, they tack on another year. So you're never essentially below 2 years. At the end of an academic year, so if somebody had a 3-year contract, rolling contract right now, they're approaching having just 2 years left. If this was a successful year, a year will be added to their contract, so in the fall, they will start with a 3-year contract again. If they do that successfully for 3 years, the most you can get as a faculty member now is a 5-year rolling contract. So every year, that 5 years becomes 4, at the end of the year becomes then 5 at the beginning of the year, if there has been some success. Also, APA required all kinds of foundational issues. Our curriculum was much more clinical, from my point of view, in the early years. Once we said, okay, we want APA accreditation, we needed to include more foundational courses, which this is probably one of those that probably came out of APA recommendations, that we would need history and systems and social psych and physiological, I don't know what else. But in any event, there were a bunch of courses that were foundational that had to be implemented in the curriculum, and so there were many fewer choices about what you could pick other than what is laid out. So I think we have very, very few electives. So you have very few choices as you go from year to year. And for some of us, that's a weakness of the program. But we're doing that to comply with APA accreditation, which is extremely important. I think without APA accreditation, we probably don't exist. So we have to play that game, and there's always a trade-off there. Okay, moving right along. Okay, I think I've talked about all of this. The key people that got us our accreditation. So the initial attempt at accreditation, we got a somewhat negative review, and there are 3 people who I think are most responsible for getting us the accreditation. They went back to APA and appealed what we thought was an overly critical, inaccurate evaluation of us. And that was Joanne Callan, who's still with us, Sydney Smith, and Julian Malsoff, who is still around. He's, I think, 92 or 93 years old. Spectacular. He was our director of research. The 3 of them, I think, did a spectacular job in convincing APA to give us the accreditation. So we got that around 1980 and have been accredited ever since. Both of our programs have 7-year accreditation right now. SIDE program will have a site visit next year. 7 years is the maximum you can get from APA. Okay, moving right along. Joanne, so let me back up. We initially were very upset with the president of CSPP, and so the faculty across campuses decided we're going to see what we can do to fire the president. It is not very easy to fire a president, okay? So we got together, people who were willing to spend their own travel money in LA, and the faculty got together and came up with a strategy. There was a board meeting, I think the next day or two, to get certain board members onto the board and then ask for a vote of no confidence for the president, which I'm making this sound a lot easier than it was. Eventually, that's what happened. So the board of directors decided to fire the president, who later became president of APA, which had some of us concerned that this was not going to be a good position for us. And the new president comes in and slowly but surely fires each of the deans. So he gets a new set of deans. So new president, next layer of administration were people that he picked. That person on this campus was Joanne Callan. So the faculty voted, and she was relatively new. She came to us from Oklahoma in 1977 or 1978, and I remember interviewing her in my office in Sorrento Valley, and she came in and she was crying, which is a somewhat unusual way to start an interview when you're applying for a new job. And I said, Joanne, and I didn't know her, this is a lovely person that I encourage all of you to get to know. She's on sabbatical this year. Said, is there something upsetting you? So that was, I thought, quite brilliant of me. Here's somebody coming in my office crying, that I figured out that something was upsetting her. And she said, yeah, they just took me on a tour of San Diego, showing me potential homes to buy, and said, we're not used to homes in San Diego. Coming from Oklahoma, it's like double or triple what we would normally spend in Oklahoma. So she was really quite depressed about that, but in any event, she bought a home, lovely home in, where is she? In Solana Beach. Solana Beach. She's lived in that home for the last close to 40 years, in any event. I mentioned Jim Chips. I wrote in my notes that he was 6'7". I really believe that he was 6'7". But the thing that we had in common, before I got involved with the Chargers and the Padres, he was a fanatic Charger fan, Padre fan, and so during these boring administrative meetings, we would talk about baseball and football, so that gave us some relief. All right, what else do I want to say about this? think I will, so Jim, by the way, and Lord Zimlick, the founding dean, both died in the last year or two, so. Now, get to PowerPoint. So we finish at 10:02, is that, so I'm going to try to finish up wherever I've gotten at 1:45, so we can ask a few minutes of questions, and if we don't have time for that, feel free to stop by my office at any point. So I'm not going to go over any of this in detail, other than we have to come up with a philosophy that APA agreed this is reasonable to have an independent, so the concept that there would be an independent PhD program, independent of a university, made no sense to APA. They were very much opposed to that concept and opposed to how many students we were educating. So keep in mind, in a typical PhD program, certainly true of where I went to school, 8 or 9 students in a class would be the norm. Well, this is our class of probably closer to 70. So they were concerned about what are we going to be doing to the marketplace. And people from a selfish point of view were concerned that this would affect their pocketbook, that their ability to earn a living would be negatively affected by the number of students that we're training. Okay, so about Alliant, you may know that in 2001, CSPP, which is a totally independent school, essentially merged or bought, you hear different language, United States International University, which was this campus, and that became Alliant International University. So at that point, so here are the key names of the people at the beginning. All of those were, I don't know how I got on that list. In any event, I think Beth just took my name on it. In any event, so I was 24 years old. These guys are all closer to 60 when this started. In any event, Alliant became the university with CSPP being the largest school within the university, and that was in 2001. So we're about 14 years into this venture. And what we had to change then was some of the clinical requirements. So we stopped requiring our PhD students to do a practicum in the first year. We have what I consider a minimal practicum for PsyD students, and then it gets, so it's a 300-hour requirement for G1 students, it becomes an 800-hour requirement G2, G3, it becomes 1,000, G4 and G5, 1,100, although the faculty strongly encourage you to get an APA accredited internship instead of doing 2 half-time caping internships and staying in San Diego. So you're encouraged to get an APA accredited internship. If you decide to do that, the vast majority of you will not be in San Diego for your internship because there are very few options in San Diego. Okay, moving right along. I think I went over these, so I'm not going to go. So here are the years: San Francisco, LA, San Diego, Fresno, Irvine, Sacramento. And with the international, and this really comes primarily out of USIU. USIU had a program in Mexico City, in Japan, and in China. I was the acting dean when we got the Hong Kong program off the ground. So I had to do multiple trips to Hong Kong, which is not my favorite activity. I don't even like driving to La Jolla. So Hong Kong is like 15 hours, and one of the trips, the electricity went out, so that scared the hell out of me. We were over the ocean, and there's no electricity, so that's nothing. My wife's sleeping, the president's sleeping, the head of the Hong Kong program is sleeping. I'm there wanting to read, and there are no lights, so it was really boring. Okay, we have our PsyD program starting in the 80s, and so these are the words where people used to describe us in the early days. We were thought innovative, creative, cutting edge, state-of-the-art, entrepreneurial, crazy, and I won't use the last word. So this is the year that I became the interim dean, so I was asked to do that with our dean resigned. I did not want to take that position long-term. I was told if I would be willing to do it, it will only be 2 or 3 months. It turned out to be 18 months, which tells you something about how efficiently we do things here. So 2 or 3 months became 18 months, which is symbolic of how things go here. Very slow, and if you want things changed, not so easy. Okay, so scholarships were important to me, getting in people from different minority groups represented. I want to make sure we are providing psychological services in the community across various ethnicities, which I think we've done a pretty good job right now. And I will meet, well, we will not be doing this since we're April, so we will be meeting about selecting your G. We've done that, forget it. We're late in the year. Okay, forget what I was going to say. Mission statement, you can get a copy of all of this if you want. I'm not going to go over this. And I think this goes over the specific programs. I don't think we need to do this, other than I think it is worth mentioning there are 2 programs, other than for a while it was our PhD in PsyD program. Now we have a psychopharmacology program, and our MFT program is part of CSPP. That was independent in the early days from CSPP, but it's now part of CSPP. Okay, so I'm not going to go through all of those details. So, anybody have any questions about how we've gone here, or anything else?
Yes, Steve, why did you put why was the PsyD program for that?
When?
No, why?
Faculty took the position that that was going to be the degree of the future, that psychologists were, in the future, primarily going to be PsyDs. I'm not sure it necessarily came out that way, that there's still plenty of psychologists who prefer to get a PhD. It's certainly a legitimate degree, and for many, a preferable degree, but it has more of a research flavor than the PsyD program was supposed to be, more heavily focused on the clinical training as opposed to research training.
And then Steve, in 1972, the program started in San Diego. Did you talk about doing this ID program back then?
No, so none of us were thinking about PsyD whatsoever. That came, matter of fact, I don't think it was discussed even in 80 when we got APA accreditation. That came in the early to mid-80s.
And can you comment on some of the better known and more successful people that are CSPP graduates?
Probably not. Better known, so we have a couple of experts on the MMPI. Richard Ruack is probably well-known alumnus at MMPI, so he has some national credibility. I would say a very significant percentage of our most successful local psychologists are CSPP alumni. is something that I'm certainly proud of. So the names of the early students who are most well-known: Ira Grossman, Russ Gold. Ira's wife is a former alumnus. Dana Grossman, she's among the head training folks at the Naval Hospital. Those are the names that come to mind. Any come to mind for you?
Well, I wasn't familiar with the first 10 or 15 years of CSBP. How about any of them get up to the level of president of the California Psych Association?
So I would say our students run the San Diego Psychological Association. So all the senior people, the San Diego Psychological Association, which I want to encourage you all to belong. It's fairly inexpensive. It's a way to stay on top of what's going on in the local community and looks good on your resume. Almost all of the presidents have been our alumni. So if you go to their annual meetings, it is our alumni who are essentially running the show there. CPA, not so much. So there hasn't been that much interest in doing state-run psychological, political kinds of things, but that's worth considering also. I would take the position for your career, ideally you would be a member of your local community, whether it's psychological association, whether it's San Diego or anywhere else, your state association, and APA. If you don't do that, it's fairly hard to stay on top of what's going on in the community. It's those monthly newsletters that keep us informed. So we have a controversial issue that happened in the past, actually January 1st, so we're talking about 3.5 months ago. The state of California said that viewing child pornography, just viewing child pornography, by definition, is child abuse. That has some significant consequences for us, like how are we going to warn our patients that if they tell us they are viewing child pornography, that we have to file a report. We are mandated reporters. So that has some huge consequences, and it's the local psychological association interacting with the state psychological association, making recommendations. And we'll hear more about this actually next week when the California Psychological Association has its annual convention. But we need to be clear with our patients up front before they open their mouth that in our informed consent, what are the consequences if they tell us that even by accident that they view child pornography. I happen to